Welcome to a new video. Today we're going to take a look at the second archetype in Amazing Defenders, which is the Purrely archetype. This particular archetype is the so-called cute, lovely archetype that probably most people are excited for, and this is an archetype that is actually pretty cool what it tries to do. But before we jump right into what the archetype does and essentially, you know, what card by card do, I will ask you, if you want to see more videos like this, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It helps a ton. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about this archetype. Also give a like to the video if you enjoyed, and without further ado, let's jump right into the archetype itself. So to start things off, I'm going to start things with the actual mechanics of the archetype, because that's how I do everything around here when it comes to these videos. And basically these archetypes actually have pretty simple mechanics overall. It might look a little bit more complex, but it's actually pretty simple. Basically this archetype works like Sky Strikers, Invoked, and what is it called? I forgot. Another archetype that kind of started with one monster, and that's the entire engine. That's kind of like how this card started, or should I say archetype starts. It started with only one main deck monster. We are supposed to get a future support in 4 months or so, 5 months technically, that is supposed to give us another kind of like support main deck monster, just like Sky Striker got, but kind of like works the same idea. You have one main deck monster that is supposed to be the heart and soul of the deck. The other mechanic that this archetype has is that it's also work with quick play spells that are supposed to get your main monster to your side of the field pretty easily. And also those particular quick play spells are also very useful for your Xyz monsters, because those will give bonuses for your Xyz monsters to get particular additional effects. And lastly, of course, they also have their big lineup of rank 7 Xyz monsters that basically rank on your rank 2 Xyz monsters, those that I mentioned that you need your Purrely and quick play spell to get into and get bonus effects. And those are like rank 7s that basically take like 5 materials of those monsters and then just like take them and essentially make them, you know, just big Xyz monsters, which is actually pretty cool. So you have like 3 layers to get to your final form essentially, which is pretty nice. But that's kind of like what the archetype mechanics are all about. It's an Xyz archetype, which is pretty cool. Now we can actually move on into the card by card themselves, and we're going to start things off, of course, with the main card of the show, of course, Purrely. This particular card is pretty cool. It has the effect that on normal or special summon, you exhibit the top 3 cards of your deck, and then you add 1 Purrely spell trap from your deck to your hand, and then you put the bottom of the rest in the bottom of the deck in any order. And then also once per turn during the main phase, you can reveal 1 Purrely quick play spell in your hand, and then special summon from your extra deck 1 Xyz monster that mentioned the revealed card, basically your rank 2s, and then using this card as a material, and you attach the quick play spell from your hand as well as a material to get yourself a rank 2 with 2 materials, and this counts as an Xyz summon, which is really, really cool. So this card, in my opinion, going to get 5 stars just because of one reason. Or should I say 2 reasons. It's the heart and soul of the deck, and 2, it's not a hard once per turn for any of its effects, so that's why this card is absolutely amazing. Now granted, the card basically carries the archetype on its back until Cyberstorm Access, which we're supposed to get in May, but it's still a very, very cool card, and I think it's really, really strong. Now moving on into the rank 2s, because now we're actually moving on into the Xyz lineup. We have or should I say, a Purrely Happiness, a Purrely Beauty, and Purrely Plump. I think that's how you pronounce these cards, and all of these cards basically have kind of the same second effect, that as a quick effect they can attach 1 quick play spell, or should I say when you activate a Purrely quick play spell, they can attach that card from the field as a material and then do an additional bonus effect. In a case of Happiness, it's return a spell and trap card from your opponent controls to the hand. In a case of Beauty, it's change a battle position. In a case of Plump, it's banish a monster until the end phase, which is pretty cool. So yeah, that's kind of like what they do in their thrice per turn effect. But what they actually do as overall, well, we first off have Happiness, which says at the end of the damage step, if this card battle, you can add 1 Purrely card from your deck to your hand. Also, if this card has Purrely Happy Memory as a material, you can have the attack of 1 face-up monster on the field, which is also pretty cool. Then we have Beauty, which says that you can target 1 effect monster your opponent controls, negates the effect until the end of the turn, and this is a quick effect if you have Pretty Memory as a material. And then we have Plump, which says that you can target up to 2 spell and trap cards in any graveyard, attach them to this card as a material, and then this is a quick effect if it has Delicious Memory as a material. So basically these little cards are also kind of like little nice things that do what they need to do, and I'm going to say this. out of all of these, all of them are actually quite decent. Happiness is okay. It's only just need a very, very specific setup with its own quick play spell, which we'll get to that when we'll get to that. But basically, it's able to search basically 1 or 2 spells, or should I say cards per battle phase, if it's able to basically battle and not be destroyed by battle, and then kind of like deal with monsters. It's kind of cool, but it's probably your worst out of the 3 options. It's kind of like the most dependent one out of all of them. I'm going to give this one a 2. I think it's pretty decent. I'm not saying it's terrible. It's just probably, in my opinion, the worst one. Beauty, in my opinion, is getting a 3 stars because this card is an Omni Negate and is actually pretty good if it's have pretty memory as a material. And then lastly, we have Plump, which in my opinion is a 4 star because this card is the one that allowing you to get pretty easily to your link, or should I say to your rank 7s, because it's able to accumulate materials just like a chunky boy pretty easily. So that is pretty cool because the big monsters require 5 materials. A rank 2 monster you control that have 5 or more materials. So yeah, this is able to basically kind of like accumulate the materials pretty easily by its own effect. It's able to take 2 spells and traps, already have 4, and then if you activate a quick play spell, it's able to attach it as well, so you're getting yourself already like a 5 material monster, and then you just rank it up, which is pretty cool. But moving on into actually the big guys, we have the big X Purrely Happiness, and then we also have X Purrely Noir. These 2 particular cards are your big monsters, and these 2, both, as I mentioned before, can only be, you can, should I say, not can only, but can be also Exceed summoned by using a rank 2 monster you control with 5 or more materials, and then you transfer those materials to discard. And then they also have their own effects as to what they do. In the case of Happiness, you're able to detach 1 material from this card, and if you do, negate the effect of all face-up monster your opponent currently controls until the end of the turn. And then if this card has a level 1 Purrely monster as a material, your opponent cannot activate counter effect in response to this effect activation. And then when this card attack is declared invulnerable, discard 5 or more materials and inflict 1500 damage to your opponent. Yeah, pretty easily to just like basically negate everything, which is pretty cool. And this is kind of like why I mentioned the original Happiness is not as good as this one, because this one is just basically able to nuke the entire board for monster negates, and then just basically also attack and deal also an additional 1500 points of damage. So yeah, this card is actually pretty good. But the main star of the show, in my opinion, is Noir, because Noir is absolutely ridiculous. This particular card has the effect that if you have 5 or more materials, it's unaffected by your opponent activated effect, which is insane. So it's basically just becomes something that your opponent cannot deal with. And on top of that, it has the effect that you can detach 2 materials from this card and then target 1 card your opponent controls or in their graveyard and place it in the bottom of the deck. And this is the quick effect if it has a level 1 Purrely monster as a material. So let's say even if this card only have 1 time the unaffected by your opponent activated effect, you're still able to get 1 spin off. And then it has 2 additional spins, which is absolutely ridiculous. In my opinion, Noir is just insane. So if I'm giving a rating for this card, Happiness getting 3 stars, Noir getting 5 stars. This card is absolutely ridiculous. This is why what I call Plump, in my opinion, is the strong one out of all of these, because it's able to bring these cards out. But Noir is basically why the deck is actually even able to do anything going first, because this Xyz monster is just... it's insane. Let's just say that this card is absolutely insane, and it's just really, really good. So yeah, that's for the Xyz monsters. Now, moving on into the spells, we don't really have a whole lot to talk about the spells, because the spells, while there are a few of them, they're quite self-explanatory what they do. We first have Stray, Purrely Street. I'm hoping that's going to also be the same name of the actual card coming out, but maybe not. But basically, this card says that your opponent cannot target Purrely monsters you control with card effects until the end of the turn they were special summoned. And once per turn, if a face-up Purrely Xyz monster you control leaves the field by an opponent card, you're able to special summon a level 1 Purrely monster from your deck or graveyard. And then once per turn during the end phase, you can target 1 Purrely Xyz monster on the field and attach 1 Purrely quick play spell from your deck or graveyard to it as a material. I'm going to say this about this card. I'm going to give this one 1 star. This is probably one of the worst cards in the archetype, if not the worst one. This probably doesn't really see any play whatsoever. It has some nice going on effects to it, but it's obviously just one of the worst cards in the entire archetype, if not the worst. Moving on into the next card, which in my opinion is the better card out of the two that is not the quick play spells, we have Purrely My Friend. This particular card says that you pay 500 life points, reveal 3 Purrely cards from your deck except Purrely My Friend, and your opponent randomly pick one for you to add to your hand. And then you shuffle the rest into the deck, and then if a face-up Purrely exceeds monster you control, leave the field by opponent card effect. Even during the damage step, you're able to add up to 3 Purrely quick play spells with different names from your graveyard to your hand, and you can only use each effect of Purrely My Friend once per turn. I'm going to give this card 4 stars because in my opinion, unlike Purrely itself, is a little bit more susceptible to cards that just remove it, because if your opponent removes this card, which they probably will try to do, you're not getting anything and you basically get nothing. But even in case of Purrely, even if they negate it, you're still at the very least getting yourself level 1 monster that you may be able to use things. So this card is a great searcher. It does depend on your opponent, unfortunately, but it's still really good, and I'm going to say that it's actually a pretty nice card. Now moving on into the memory cards, which are the card that kind of just make your Xyz monsters. We have basically Purrely Happy Memory, Pretty Memory, and Delicious Memory. These 3 particular cards are the cards that basically kind of like help you bring up your rank 2 Xyz monsters. And then we have, first off, with of course Happy Memory, you're able to choose 1 card on the field until the end of the turn. It cannot be destroyed by card effect, and then you can discard 1 card and special summon 1 Purrely monster from your deck, and that's kind of like what it does. And it's also have the additional other effect that says that a Purrely Xyz monster that uses this card as a material get this effect, that can attack up to the number of times each battle phase, which is Purrely Memory attached to it +1. So basically, if you have this attached, it's at least able to attack twice. In the case of Pretty Memory, each player get 1,000 life points, and then you can discard 1 card and special summon 1 Purrely monster from your deck. A Purrely Xyz monster have this on material get the effect to send that once per turn you can send 1 other card you control to the graveyard and target 1 card your opponent control and attach this card as a material. Then we have Delicious Memory, which is the last one. It's allowing you to choose 1 monster on the field and cannot be destroyed by battle until the end of the turn. And then you can discard 1 card, of course, and special summon 1 level 1 Purrely monster from your deck. And the monster that gets this material get the effect to gain 300 attack and defense for each material attached to it. So, out of all of these cards, I think the best one is overall to summon Purrely because it's so easy to use. Pretty Memory, it's going to get 4 stars. And then in the case of Delicious Memory and in the case of Happy Memory, both of these cards are going to get 3. They're great, don't get me wrong, they're kind of neg 1 emergency teleports, but pretty good. It's just they're really depending on your opponent or someone having another monster. Now, of course, it can also be your own Purrely monster because you can just use it to kind of like be your catalyst, or other monsters as well to be your own catalyst if you have the ability to, but they're a lot harder to activate than, you know, the Pretty Memory that just make people make both players gain 1,000 life points. So yeah, I do think that Pretty Memory out of the 3 is the best one, but all of these are just quite decent. So now we move on into the last card, which is Purrely Leap ? This particular card is basically the last card of the archetype, and it's trap card, which I don't really like this card, but anyway, we have to talk about it. And this card says that you can target 1 Purrely Xyz monster you control, and then special summon from your extra deck 1 Purrely Xyz monster with a different rank than the monster that you control by using it as a material, and return to the extra deck during the end phase of this turn. Or should I say next turn. And this is treated as an Xyz summon and everything. And then the other effect is that you can banish this card from your graveyard and target up to 3 Purrely monsters in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck, and that's it. I'm going to give this card, even though I know that people are playing this as a discard fodder to just have it, like, you know, cycle back your Purrely monsters, I'm going to give this one 1 star because in my opinion it's just really not that good. I know that people are playing this as a discard outlet and you're trying to get this into the graveyard, but I still think it's absolutely atrocious. It's just such a bad card that it's not shuffle 3 then draw 1, at least then it had a redeeming quality, and also just getting rid of your Purrely Xyz monsters so easily, it's just really bad. I mean, it sometimes comes up that it can actually be fine to just giving you the last final push, but it's still just not really that good in my opinion. So like I said, I'm going to give this one as 1. Now, that does it for the support that we get from Amazing Defenders. Now we can actually move into the stuff that we're getting from CYCO. And from CYCO, which is Cyberstorm Access, we're getting 2 additional cards that essentially help the archetype quite a bit. The first one of them is Purrely Lily, which says that if this card is normal or special summon, you're able to add a Purrely card from your deck to your hand except a quick play spell, which means that you're able to add the continuous spell. Then you can target 1 quick play spell in your graveyard and special summon 1 Xyz monster that mention it from your extra deck by using this card you control as a material, and if you do, attach the target to the summoned monster as an additional material, of course count as an Xyz summon. So I'm going to give Purrely Lily, I'm going to give it 4 stars. It's basically a pretty good card, but it does require a little bit of a setup. So let's say you activate your quick play spell, your opponent negate it, and then you have this in your hand as a material, as a card. You're able to normal summon it, get yourself the continuous spell, then get the quick play spell in the graveyard, let's say the Purrely Memory, and then just go into your Purrely Beauty, which is pretty good. So yeah, this card is actually good, very, very good for that. And then for the last card that we're going to get an additional support from CYCO, which is Purrely Sleepy Memory, is the last card. It's another quick play spell to help you just start your plays. Basically, we have this card that says apply this effect, then you can discard 1 card, and if you do, special summon 1 level 1 Purrely monster from your deck. And then once applied, the next battle effect or effect damage you take this turn becomes 0. A Purrely Xyz monster that has this material get the effect that once per turn during your opponent's standby phase, you draw 1 card. I'm going to give this one 4 stars. This card is actually really, really good. Basically, another one that doesn't really depend on your opponent. You can just activate it. You just don't take damage the first time or effect damage, which is really, really good. On top of that, it's able to get you additional more cards, which is something that Purrely really, really struggle with. So this card is actually absolutely excellent in my opinion, and I do think it's quite good. But that does it for the Purrely cards as an overall. I know it took me a little bit of a while to talk about these, but these cards are actually really, really cool. Now I can actually jump really quickly into their strengths and weaknesses. So strength for the archetype is actually pretty good. This archetype has like a pretty stupid Omni Negate that's just able to just stand and your opponent able to do absolutely nothing. It's able to run really easily a lot of board breakers and interruptions because it doesn't really need a whole lot for its engine, where like I wouldn't say not need a whole lot, but like it doesn't really have a whole lot of cards it actually need 100%. It needs a few, like you need half the deck, but it doesn't really need more than half the deck. So that's why this deck has the potential to run more board interruptions. Third, Purrely is a card that is not hard once per turn, which making this card really, really good. If you're able to cycle it, you're able to keep gaining advantage, which is really, really nice. And Lily, I believe, is a hard once per turn, but at least Purrely itself is not. And of course, it's just cute, and you're able to OTK actually with this archetype quite easily, because if you're sitting on a war, you will be quite fine for a turn, unless of course your opponent will kaiju you. But people don't really run kaijus right now. Maybe they will start, but for now they don't really run kaijus. Now, what is the cons of the archetype? Well, pretty much big thing that if you're not able to get your Purrely engine going and your opponent knows how to stop you in the choke points, you're basically dead in the water and you're not able to do anything, especially if you don't see your quick play spells. Your recovery is pretty bad, and you also really, really much just depend on having tons of cards in your hand to discard and actually do things, because you have so many cards that just like say the quick play spells, you need to discard a card to special summon Purrely level 1, which kind of just make it really, really hard for you in economic level. But other than that, the archetype is actually pretty good as an overall, and I think it's pretty cool. But what are good cards to use in the Purrely archetype? Well, first and foremost, the obvious one, 1-for-1. Zeus is also a great option with its engine because it's an Xyz archetype, and we also have the Xyz import, which is a decent maybe side deck card that can help you to target an Xyz monster you control and one monster your opponent controls with attack less than equal to it, and then you attach that monster to your monster as a material, giving you an additional more material and also kind of like a really, really cool removal. Additional cards that can help is Linkaribo and maybe Anima, Relinquish Anima, because they're both level 1. Like I mentioned before, of course, this deck really like to run board breakers, so Lightning Storms can also be really good. And if you're looking for some spice, although I'm not 100% sure if it's the best idea, you could run the Adventure Engine, because technically you do need a normal summon, but some people think that you don't really need it that much because you can have the quick play spells. So it's kind of like a weird balance with them. So I do think that maybe the Adventure Engine has some kind of like room in Purrely, but it's not like absolutely necessary in the deck, but it could actually just raise your ceiling of the deck because of Griffin Rider and all of these particular cards. But now we can actually move into the cards that are good against this archetype. Well, first and foremost, any hand trap, just like Ash Blossoms, that just stop your Purrely or things in their tracks, can actually just really deal with this archetype well. Dimension Shifter also pretty good because you're able to sometimes get rid of their quick play spells or that are in the graveyard, or any card that like they want to have in the graveyard because they also discard, or you know, maybe they have some card that just trying to numb materials out of the graveyard. Just being able to get rid of them is actually kind of good. Gamma Seal is also a pretty good option in any kaiju, like I mentioned before, because you're able to tribute over the Noir, and then the Noir is just removed, and then they're basically not able to do anything because, like I mentioned, Noir is their main card, kind of like going first. And then Inverted Permanence, as I mentioned, a Monster Interruption, and also Dimensional Barrier, because if you're able to stop Xyz as an overall going first, this archetype is kind of dead in the water. But that's pretty much does it for the cards that are good against. Now, to conclude the archetype itself, what do I think about it? Well, I'm going to say this and be absolutely honest. Purrely is a little bit better than I give it credit for, especially after Cyberstorm Access. Right now, in my opinion, it's a 2.5-star archetype because it does really need a whole lot of support, like, you know, the support of Cyberstorm Access that actually make it really good with Lily, and the additional quick play spell that you can activate really easily. And also probably the quick play spell is going to throw toll of another Xyz monster, but that's beside the point. Point is that the archetype is really good. It's just really bad at recovery. It does have the ability to run adventures and other things of that nature, but I'm not 100% sure how strong it is right now out of the box. In my opinion, out of the box, because of not having Lily and some of the support, is actually not the best, but it's still a really cool rogue archetype. I don't think it's in the same level as Rescue Ace, at least right now, because I do think out of the box, Rescue Ace is the best archetype out of the three if you don't add anything else. But if we're talking about like Cyberstorm Access and other support of that line, I do think that Purrely is at the very least 3-star card. I do think that after Cyberstorm Access, it's probably going to rise into a 4. But right now, let's talk about what it actually is right now. But that does it for the archetype as an overall. I do like this archetype quite a bit. I think it's actually quite cute and it's pretty cool. And honestly, I might pick them up because they're just really cute, depending on how expensive they will be, because, you know, they're probably going to be a little bit of expensive because of how many people are actually looking for them. But like I said, Purrely are great. They're just purely great. And yeah, that does it for the video. So if you enjoyed it and if you want to see more, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It helps a ton. Let me know in the comments down below again what do you think and what kind of like things that I may be missed or you think that are questions of yours. And of course, give a like into the video if you enjoyed. And with that, I will say to you goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.